Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here with us today. Before we dive into today's incredible story, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow we have an even more powerful story coming your way that you won't want to miss. We're all about sharing unforgettable tales that inspire and spark conversation. So make sure you're part of our community by subscribing and joining us for tomorrow's adventure. Let's get started. MMA fighter versus Royal Guard. Who will win in real combat? Axel Carter, a 28-year-old MMA champion, was known for his over-the-top bravado. His reputation wasn't just built on his fighting skills, but also on his personality. Loud, bold, and impossible to ignore. Fresh from a controversial pay-per-view victory, Axel swaggered through the streets of London, his eyes scanning the surroundings with a mix of disdain and amusement. He had always believed that his sport, MMA, was the pinnacle of combat training. He mocked the idea of ceremonial military service, convinced that the real strength came from raw, unrelenting power that only fighters like him understood. As Axel approached Buckingham Palace, the sight of the royal guardsmen standing still, almost like statues, caught his attention. His smirk grew wider. "This place is like a museum," he muttered to his companions, his voice deliberately loud enough for others to hear. All this fancy tradition and guys playing dress-up. His entourage, Derek and Shah, flanked him, nodding in agreement like extensions of his ego. To Axel, military training seemed like a joke, pointless rituals and outdated techniques that couldn't hold up in a real fight. With exaggerated confidence, Axel made his way toward the guard standing tall at attention. Sergeant Jack Turner. Turner, a 32-year-old veteran of the U.S. Army, stood motionless, his eyes focused on the distant horizon. His posture was perfect, and his uniform was immaculate. His years of service had taught him the importance of maintaining discipline, especially in public settings. His experiences in combat had forged him into a man capable of remaining calm under the most intense pressure. But Axel wasn't impressed. To him, Turner was just another soldier stuck in an old-fashioned routine. He moved closer to the guard, his voice loud and mocking. "Hey, buddy, does your face hurt from not moving all day?" Axel laughed, as though the idea of standing still for hours was absurd. His companions chuckled, but Sergeant Turner remained unfazed. His eyes were fixed ahead, his breathing slow and deliberate, completely in control of his emotions. Axel continued, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "This is why I don't respect military training. It's all about following orders, standing still, looking pretty. Put this guy in an octagon for 5 minutes and he'd be destroyed." With every word, Axel's bravado grew, but Sergeant Turner's stillness remained, as steady as a mountain. He knew the real challenge wasn't in reacting to every provocation, but in maintaining discipline and composure, no matter how loud or disrespectful the world around him became. As the tourists watched this clash of egos unfold, the tension in the air grew thicker. Axel, full of confidence, had no idea what was coming next. Sergeant Jack Turner stood like a rock, unmoving, as Axel continued his taunts. The noise of Axel's mocking voice sliced through the air, but Turner's calm demeanor never wavered. To any onlooker, it might have seemed like he was just another ceremonial guard, lost in the stillness of tradition. But for those who knew, they could see the steel behind the surface. Turner wasn't just standing still for show. He was ready. He had faced real danger, real life-or-death situations far removed from the staged bravado of an MMA fighter. His posture was the product of years spent in war zones, Afghanistan, Iraq, and countless covert missions where discipline and patience were not optional, but essential for survival. Axel, however, was oblivious to the weight of the man standing before him. He thought Turner was just another soldier stuck in outdated protocols, too rigid to survive in a real fight. Axel couldn't understand how anyone could be still for so long without losing control. "This is what you call combat training?" Axel shouted, pacing in front of Turner like a lion sizing up its prey. "All that standing still, looking pretty? There's no way this guy could handle real combat. He's a mannequin in a uniform." Axel's companions, Derek and Shah, snickered as they filmed the whole spectacle on their phones, eager to catch every moment of Axel's performance. But what Axel failed to realize was that Turner's stillness wasn't weakness. It was the embodiment of control. Turner's breathing was steady, measured, every muscle coiled and ready for whatever might come next. His eyes, though focused ahead, were alert, calculating, waiting for the moment to act. He had been trained to handle far worse than a loudmouth fighter trying to provoke him. He had endured the chaos of battle, the unpredictability of combat, where every move could be a matter of life or death. Axel's words were nothing compared to the challenges Turner had faced in real life. As Axel continued to pace, showing off his MMA techniques and claiming that military training was obsolete, Turner remained unshaken. Axel got closer, almost close enough to touch Turner's immaculate uniform. The tension was rising, and the crowd sensed it. The tourists who had gathered to admire the guardsman now watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. They could feel the shift in the air, the quiet yet undeniable tension between two worlds, one of controlled discipline and the other of raw aggression. Axel was about to find out just how different they were. Axel's taunts grew louder as he moved even closer to Sergeant Turner. He circled him, the aggressive swagger in his steps growing with each passing moment. "You really think this is combat training? Standing still like a statue? I've fought guys with actual military experience, and they get destroyed in seconds. Military training is nothing but a show, no real fight in it." Axel sneered, his voice carrying through the crowd. His words were sharp, biting, and the crowd could feel the growing tension in the air. Axel, with his world of fast punches and high kicks, thought he had it all figured out. His sport, MMA, was all about adaptability, speed, and raw power. He couldn't fathom why anyone would choose discipline and tradition over the thrill of combat. But what Axel failed to understand was the difference between fighting for sport and fighting for survival. Sergeant Turner had been through things Axel would never imagine. His training didn't come from a gym or a cage. It came from years spent in war zones, where every move had consequences. Turner's discipline was built not on theatrics, but on the necessity of surviving in the most dangerous situations. Unlike Axel, who relied on spectacle to prove his strength, Turner's training was about mental fortitude, making split-second decisions, and neutralizing threats with efficiency. In combat, there was no room for showmanship. Axel's words grew more and more forceful. "This is why I don't respect military guys. You guys just stand there, rigid, following some outdated code. Real fighters know how to adapt, how to take charge. Put me in the ring with you, and I'd have you tapping out in minutes." His voice rang out across the courtyard, the tourists watching in growing discomfort. But Sergeant Turner's expression remained unchanged. He stood like a statue, unshaken, his eyes fixed ahead. It was a subtle demonstration of what he had been trained for, the ability to remain calm, controlled, and unprovoked no matter the situation. Axel didn't understand it. He continued to demonstrate his punches in the air, throwing them with power and precision. "See this? This is the stuff that puts people down. None of that rigid military crap." He moved closer, his body language shifting toward aggression, now inches from Turner's motionless form. But still, Turner did not flinch. The guard's silence, his perfect stillness, made Axel's taunt seem even more hollow. As Axel moved in, a small part of him, just a small part, began to realize that he wasn't dealing with someone who could be rattled. He wasn't dealing with a statue. He was dealing with a man who had seen and survived things Axel could never imagine. Axel's performance continued, but a subtle shift was happening. The crowd was starting to sense it. This wasn't just a battle of words anymore. Something was about to give. And Axel, for all his cocky bravado, had no idea what he was about to face. Axel, still basking in the sound of his own voice, continued to close the distance between himself and Sergeant Turner. He moved with theatrical precision, demonstrating his strikes in the air, his confidence growing with each exaggerated movement. "This is what real combat training looks like," Axel declared, his voice dripping with superiority. "See this right here? This is power, precision. Military guys like you, you don't have this. No adaptability, no quick thinking. You'd be dead in an actual fight." His words were meant to taunt, but the reality of the situation was starting to shift. The crowd had grown uneasy, sensing something changing in the air. Axel's hands moved like lightning, throwing punches and kicks, each one aimed closer and closer to Turner's body. Yet, through it all, Turner remained perfectly still, unmoving, unshaken. His eyes, though fixed ahead, were no longer just watching. They were calculating, assessing. In every fiber of his being, Turner was prepared for the moment that was inevitably coming. The longer Axel went on with his performance, the more it seemed like the guard was simply waiting for the right moment to act. With every move Axel made, he got closer, inches away. His foot moved forward, just a fraction, as if he were preparing for a takedown. Axel couldn't help himself. He had to prove he was better. He had to show that his way was the only way. See this? Axel continued, his chest puffing out as he demonstrated another move. This is how you win in real life. Military training doesn't prepare you for this. All your rules, your rigid stances, none of it works when you're face to face with someone like me. And then, without warning, Axel took one more step, closing the final gap between them. His hand reached out, almost casually, as if to brush against Turner's uniform, to challenge him in a way that wasn't just verbal anymore. It was physical. He thought it was a demonstration of his dominance, but in that instant, Turner's stillness became something else entirely. In one fluid motion, Turner shifted his weight and pivoted, redirecting Axel's momentum. It was a move so swift, so precise, that the crowd barely registered what had happened before Axel found himself off balance, his grip on Turner's uniform broken. Before he could react, Turner's gloved hand was on his wrist, locking it in place with perfect mechanical precision. The air around them seemed to hold its breath. Axel stood frozen, disbelief spreading across his face. He tried to twist, to break free, but Turner's hold was unyielding, his technique flawless. "You've just made physical contact with a member of the Queen's Guard," Turner said, his voice steady, calm, but with a clear authority that made the entire courtyard fall silent. "That's an offense." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Some whispered, others took a step back. The tension had completely shifted from spectacle to something far more serious. Axel, the loudmouth fighter who had once mocked the military, was now caught in the very grip of the training he had once dismissed. There was no showmanship here, no performance, just the cold, efficient application of military expertise. And in that moment, Axel realized the vast difference between his world and the world he had so carelessly mocked. The moment Axel's wrist was locked in Sergeant Turner's grip, everything around him seemed to freeze. The confidence that had been so blatant in his every move evaporated, replaced by stunned disbelief. He tried to twist, to break free, but Turner's hold was unshakable, efficient, precise, as if this moment had been written in the laws of physics rather than a contest of wills. Turner's expression remained neutral, his face still impassive, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, said everything. This was no longer about showing off or proving a point. It was about maintaining order, about knowing when to act and when not to. In this moment, Turner wasn't just protecting a ceremonial post. He was ensuring that the line between respect and provocation had been clearly drawn. "Step back, sir." Turner's voice cut through the tension, steady and without a hint of emotion. "You have made physical contact with a member of the Queen's Guard. That is an offense." His words, so calmly spoken, seemed to carry the weight of centuries of military discipline. There was no anger, no aggression in his voice, just the cold professionalism of a man who had faced far more dangerous situations than this one. And in that moment, Axel realized just how out of his depth he truly was. The crowd, which had been eagerly watching Axel's antics with a mixture of curiosity and amusement, now stood in stunned silence. Some began to back away, sensing that this was no longer a mere spectacle. The onlookers were now witnessing something real, something grounded in decades, even centuries, of training, discipline, and authority. Axel's bravado had met the stone wall of military professionalism, and it had shattered. The tourists' phones, once raised to capture the drama of Axel's performance, now lowered in a collective acknowledgement of what had just happened. Axel's eyes flickered with frustration, and his voice rose, no longer confident but pleading. "I was just demonstrating. It's not like I was attacking you," he stammered, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. But it was too late. The words rang hollow. Turner's grip didn't tighten. It didn't need to. It was the perfect application of control without excess, a simple, precise maneuver that left no room for resistance. The off-duty military man who had been watching nearby stepped forward, his face grim. "What you witnessed wasn't fighting," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "That was military protocol. It's not about power or showmanship. It's about neutralizing threats. efficiently, with the minimum force required. As palace security arrived, Axel's situation quickly escalated. The once cocky fighter was now being guided away, his swagger gone, replaced by the sudden realization of just how far out of his league he was. He had come here, assuming he could prove the superiority of his fighting style. But in the end, it was his lack of understanding that had gotten the best of him. Turner, with one fluid motion, had shown him that true discipline and control didn't require grand gestures or flashy moves. It simply required knowing when to act and when to remain still. As Axel was escorted away, the tourists slowly resumed their activities, but something had changed. The atmosphere was different now, more respectful, more reverent. The guard, who had been the object of ridicule just moments before, now stood taller, his posture unbroken. He returned to his post, eyes forward, the embodiment of strength through restraint. The crowd was left to reflect on the difference between performance and duty, between spectacle and real strength. It was a lesson not lost on anyone who had witnessed the moment. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what just happened. Do you think Axel pushed too far with his challenge, or was he just trying to prove a point? What do you think about the way Sergeant Turner handled the situation? Did his calm and controlled response surprise you, or was it exactly what you expected from someone with his experience? This moment was more than just a clash of egos. It was about understanding the difference between showmanship and real combat experience. Military training isn't just about standing still or following orders. It's about knowing when to act, when to hold your ground, and how to neutralize a threat with precision. But we want to know, how do you think these two worlds, MMA and military service, compare in terms of real combat? And for those of you who have experience in the military or martial arts, we'd love to hear your perspective. What are some of the key differences between training for sport and training for survival? Let us know where you're watching from and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this story, and make sure to subscribe because we have more powerful tales coming your way.